I'm Olivia, 32 years old, and 2 years ago, my father cut me out of the family business I'd spent 15 years helping to build. He handed it, along with our family home, investment accounts, and everything else, to my younger brother, Asher, calling him the rightful Oakhart heir. I walked away with nothing but my dignity. Last week, I got a text from my mother. "Mortgage is due. Can we talk?" This morning, I walked into the house I grew up in and found my parents, looking 10 years older, and broke. Asher was missing. The company on the verge of collapse. I wasn't prepared for what my father offered next. Before I tell you the full story, let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from. And if this got your heart racing, hit like and subscribe. Because what happened next changed everything. My story, our family story, began long before me or Asher. It started with my grandfather, Samuel "Sam" Oakhart, who founded Oakhart Builders from his garage in a quiet Denver suburb in 1965. He had nothing but sheer determination, a battered pickup truck, and a vision. He built it, brick by painstaking brick, into a respectable local business. He was a man of integrity, known for his handshake deals and quality work. I remember him as a gruff but kind man, always smelling of sawdust and ambition. He used to let me sit in his lap in his office, drawing on scrap paper while he reviewed blueprints. Those were some of my happiest memories. When my father, George, took over in the early 1990s, he took Sam's solid foundation and exploded it into a regional powerhouse. George was a force of nature, expanding contracts across the entire Rocky Mountain region. He was driven, relentless, and truly brilliant when it came to scaling the business. The Oakhart name, emblazoned on our work trucks and construction signs, became synonymous with reliability and excellence in Denver. I was 7 years old when Asher was born. I remember it like it was yesterday. My father's face, usually so composed, was practically radiating in the hospital waiting room. He paced, he fidgeted, he checked his watch every 30 seconds. When the nurse finally announced, "It's a boy," his entire being seemed to ignite. "Finally, an Oakhart to carry on the family name," Dad declared, his voice booming with pride. It was as if I, his 7-year-old daughter who'd been living and breathing for the previous 7 years, hadn't existed at all. That moment, that single triumphant declaration, set the tone for the next 25 years of our family dynamics. From that day on, I felt like I was living in Asher's shadow, a permanent fixture just outside the spotlight that followed him everywhere. The difference in how we were treated was subtle at first, almost imperceptible to an outsider, but unmistakable to me. For Asher's 5th birthday, when he was just a little whirlwind of a kid, Dad had the company crew build him a custom playhouse. It wasn't just any playhouse. It was a miniature Victorian mansion, complete with tiny working windows, a shingled roof, and a fully functional door, nestled perfectly in our sprawling backyard. It was the talk of the neighborhood. That same year, for my 12th birthday, I got a cake and a bookstore gift card. A nice gesture, certainly, but it felt small, insignificant. It was clear then, even to my young mind, that what Dad saw as an investment, a symbol of future prosperity, was reserved exclusively for his son. Asher got the elaborate, custom-built structure. I got the mass-produced, easily replaceable item. Academic achievements were met with similar disparity. When I brought home straight A's on my report card, beaming with pride and hoping for a rare flicker of admiration, Mom, Martha, would simply say, "That's nice, honey." Her eyes, however, would almost immediately turn to Asher. If he managed to pull a C- in math, she'd praise him effusively for improving, for trying his best. It stung. It constantly taught me that my excellence was merely expected, while Asher's mediocrity was cause for celebration. It was a cruel lesson in conditional affection. My mother wasn't openly biased, not in the way Dad was, but she absolutely enabled his favoritism. She was the peacekeeper, the one who always tried to smooth things over with extra attention or a whispered comfort when Dad wasn't looking. "Your father just has traditional values," she'd whisper, patting my hand after particularly painful instances of Dad's blatant preference for Asher. "He doesn't mean anything by it, but he did mean something by it. It meant everything. It meant I was always less, always secondary, simply because I wasn't a Patterson man, or in our case, an Oakhart man. Her excuses, while perhaps meant to soothe, only reinforced the narrative that his behavior was acceptable, a mere quirk, rather than a deep-seated injustice. By the time I reached high school, I had developed a coping strategy, a singular focus, excellence. If I couldn't win their affection through my mere existence, perhaps achievement would do the trick. I threw myself into every business-related club I could find, becoming president of the Future Business Leaders of America chapter, and eventually I graduated as salutatorian. My grades were impeccable, my extracurriculars designed to scream future CEO. Meanwhile, Asher barely maintained a C average, spending more time and attention on extracurricular activities that involved parties and mischief, rather than academics. During my sophomore year, I overheard Dad talking with Asher in the den after Asher had been caught drinking at a school dance. My blood ran cold, anticipating a lecture, a grounding, something. Instead, Dad just laughed. "Boys will be boys," he chuckled, a dismissive wave of his hand. "Just don't get caught next time." I remember clenching my fists, the memory of my own punishment still fresh. 3 months earlier, I'd been grounded for a week, not for drinking, not for a serious transgression, but for missing curfew by a mere 15 minutes after staying late at a study group. The double standard was a punch to the gut, a constant reminder that the rules and consequences simply didn't apply equally to us. When it came time for college decisions, I specifically chose to major in business management with a focus on construction management. It wasn't because it was my burning passion at that moment. It was a calculated decision. I truly believed that this would finally earn my father's respect. I wanted to show him I was serious, dedicated, and absolutely committed to the family business. I even researched top programs, ensuring I had the best possible academic foundation. Asher, on the other hand, bounced between 3 different majors, first engineering, then psychology, before finally settling on communications. Largely, he admitted, because it was easy. His college experience was a prolonged vacation, a 4-year party funded by the bank of Mom and Dad. The summer before my senior year of college, I interned at Oakhart Builders. This wasn't just a casual summer job for me. It was my proving ground. I arrived early, stayed late, and absorbed everything I possibly could about estimating, project management, and client relations. I shadowed different departments, asked 1,000 questions, and volunteered for every extra task. Dad, however, barely acknowledged my presence. He assigned me to file paperwork, a task so menial it felt like a deliberate insult. Meanwhile, Asher, home from his sophomore year, was invited to client meetings, taken to job sites, and given access to senior executives. Asher needs to learn the business from the ground up, Dad explained, completely straight-faced, when I questioned why my brother was attending executive meetings while I was organizing the supply closet. The irony was so profound, so thick, it hung in the air like dust. But it was completely lost on him. He genuinely saw nothing wrong with this blatant favoritism. Despite everything, despite the constant dismissals and the obvious favoritism, I genuinely loved our family business. I saw its potential, its history, and I truly wanted to be a part of its future. Every summer and holiday break, I worked different positions throughout the company, from the accounting department to the construction crews. I learned the names of every employee, from the newest laborer to the longest-serving foreman. I understood their concerns, their processes, and their ideas for improvement. I absorbed the nuances of Oakhart Builders, from the ground up, in a way Asher never even attempted. Christmas of my senior year in college, I presented my father with a detailed, meticulously researched business plan for expanding Oakhart Builders into green building practices. I'd spent months researching industry trends, analyzing tax incentives, and identifying potential new client bases. This wasn't a superficial idea. It was a comprehensive, actionable strategy. He glanced at the cover, barely even registering the title, said, "We'll see," and set it aside. Later that very same night, he spent 2 hours in the den with Asher, patiently teaching him how to read blueprints, even though Asher showed absolutely no interest or aptitude for it. I could hear Asher's bored sighs from my room. Mom tried to comfort me afterward. "Your father just connects better with Asher," she said, patting my hand. "He doesn't know how to relate to a daughter in business." I pointed out that several major construction companies in our area were run by incredibly successful women. She just shrugged and changed the subject, her helplessness serving as yet another silent endorsement of Dad's bias. By the time I graduated, I had accepted that I would never be the favorite. That painful truth had finally sunk in. But I was determined to prove my worth through results. I believed that actions spoke louder than words, and eventually my contributions would become so undeniable, so critical to the company's success, that they would simply have no choice but to acknowledge me. Looking back now, I recognize the sheer naivety in that hope. No amount of excellence can overcome entrenched favoritism, especially when it's reinforced by deeply traditional, outdated gender expectations. Despite everything, I never gave up. Maybe that was my greatest strength, or perhaps my biggest weakness. I refused to walk away from a family and a business that I loved, even when every single sign pointed to the fact that my place in both would always be secondary to my brother's. The financial disparities continued, stark and unapologetic. I worked 3 part-time jobs throughout college to pay for my expenses, scraping by, meticulously budgeting every dollar. Meanwhile, Asher received a full ride from the bank of Mom and Dad, complete with a luxury apartment near campus and a brand new car every 2 years. My parents covered his tuition, rent, meal plan, and gave him a generous monthly allowance that exceeded what many graduates make in their first jobs. When I asked my parents why they wouldn't help me financially, even with just a fraction of what they gave Asher, Dad said, with a perfectly straight face, "You need to learn the value of hard work," as if Asher, lounging in his new BMW, credit card expenses being paid off quarterly by my parents, was somehow learning that same valuable lesson. I graduated summa cum laude with a double major in business administration and construction management. I pushed myself, I excelled, and I earned those accolades through pure grit. Asher, on the other hand, barely scraped by with a 2.3 GPA in communications after 5.5 years. The contrast couldn't have been sharper. At my graduation dinner, a small, subdued affair, Dad raised a toast. He lifted his glass, looked around the table, and said, "To Olivia, who always does things by the book." It was a backhanded compliment, a thinly veiled criticism of my methodical approach. 6 months later, at Asher's graduation, Dad wept openly. He clutched Asher's shoulder, his voice thick with emotion, declaring, "To my son, who will carry the Oakhart name into the future of our business." It was a public coronation, a clear statement of succession, and it was delivered with a raw, undeniable pride that had never once been directed at me. That moment solidified what I already knew. The path to George's legacy was paved exclusively for his son. When I officially joined Oakhart Builders after graduation, I was placed in an entry-level estimating position, despite my double majors and years of practical experience. My starting salary was lower than that of recent hires with less education and no family connection. "You need to understand every aspect of the business from the ground up," Dad explained, his familiar refrain. 3 weeks later, Asher, fresh out of a 5.5-year communications degree, was installed in a newly created Vice President of Client Relations role. It came complete with a sprawling corner office overlooking the city and a shiny new company car. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. During my first year, I identified nearly $400,000 in potential savings through more efficient material ordering processes. I created a meticulous spreadsheet tracking historical pricing from various suppliers and identified patterns that allowed us to negotiate significantly better rates. It was solid, measurable, impactful work. When I presented my findings in a management meeting, Dad nodded once, almost imperceptibly, and said, "Interesting." Then, without another word, he moved on to Asher's presentation about hosting a company golf tournament. The irony, the sheer audacity of it, was almost comical. Despite the constant disappointment, the relentless underestimation, I continued to excel. I became known among the project managers as the person who could solve problems. When material shipments were delayed, I found alternatives, often calling in favors from suppliers I diligently cultivated relationships with. When subcontractors failed to show, I had backups ready to call, their numbers memorized, their work history vetted. I built relationships with everyone, from the cheerful receptionist who controlled the schedule to the gruff lead foreman on our biggest projects. I understood the ground-level reality of the business in a way no one else in management truly did. One particular project stands out vividly in my memory. We were building a medical office complex, the Denver General Medical Center Annex, with an incredibly tight deadline and substantial penalties for late completion. 2 months into construction, our project manager quit unexpectedly. It was a crisis. Asher was supposed to step in. It was theoretically his responsibility, but he was, predictably, on a 3-week European vacation with friends, completely unreachable. Dad was in a genuine panic. The penalties alone could devastate us. That's when I volunteered to take over. I worked 14-hour days, 6 weeks straight. I renegotiated fiercely with subcontractors, reorganized the entire construction schedule to optimize crew time, and personally supervised critical phases of the project, often sleeping on a cot in the construction trailer. We completed the building 2 days ahead of schedule and, remarkably, under budget. The client, a major healthcare corporation, was so impressed they immediately contracted us for their next expansion phase. At the completion ceremony, I stood in the background, a ghost, while Dad and Asher, who had returned just in time for the ribbon cutting, took all the credit. The client CEO, a sharp, astute woman, specifically asked for me. She shook my hand, looked me directly in the eye, and said, "This wouldn't have happened without you, Olivia." Dad overheard. He looked momentarily uncomfortable, a fleeting flicker of something that might have been shame, before clapping Asher robustly on the shoulder and beaming. "The Oakhart men know how to deliver." The insult, the blatant erasure of my contribution, hung heavy in the air. Meanwhile, my personal life was a stark contrast to Asher's gilded existence. I lived modestly in a small 1-bedroom apartment, carefully budgeting every dollar. Asher purchased a sprawling waterfront condo in a Denver suburb, using his inflated executive compensation package, and as I would later discover, company funds. I brought lunch from home, carefully packed in a reusable container, and drove a 10-year-old Honda Civic with almost 200,000 miles on it. Asher expensed lavish client lunches at high-end restaurants and drove a company-leased BMW, replaced every 2 years. I built my savings account, meticulously squirreling away every extra penny. Asher accumulated credit card debt, which my parents periodically and silently paid off. The company continued to grow, largely due to the robust systems I developed and the client relationships I meticulously cultivated. I successfully created a new division focusing on sustainable construction, a direct result of the business plan Dad had so casually dismissed. This initiative attracted prestigious clients concerned about environmental impact, opening up entirely new revenue streams for us. These projects carried higher profit margins and rapidly built our reputation as an innovative, forward-thinking firm. Dad, of course, took full credit for the initiative in industry publications, despite having initially dismissed my proposal as too complicated and risky. Asher's contributions were, to put it mildly, less tangible. He was the photogenic face at charity galas and golf tournaments. He charmed the wives of clients at holiday parties with his easy smile and superficial conversation. He looked good in company marketing materials, but when he did manage projects, they typically ran over budget and fell significantly behind schedule, invariably requiring other managers, usually me, to step in and salvage them. It became a running joke among the more experienced crews. "Just wait till Asher touches it, then Olivia will come in and fix it." During my 5th year with the company, we faced a major crisis, one that almost brought Oakhart Builders to its knees. A significant commercial project, the Sterling Towers, was on the verge of collapse after Asher, in a display of breathtaking incompetence, approved design changes without properly calculating the structural implications. The client was threatening legal action, and our reputation, the very foundation of Oakhart Builders, was at stake. Asher, conveniently, was sick the week this all came to light, completely unreachable. For 2 grueling weeks, I worked tirelessly, negotiating with architects, engineers, and the furious client to find a viable solution. I secured additional financing, brought in specialized subcontractors, and personally supervised the remediation work. The project was saved, albeit with reduced profit margins, but our reputation barely remained intact. When the dust settled, Dad called me into his office. For a moment, just a fleeting, desperate moment, I thought recognition was finally coming. "You've done good work cleaning up the situation," he said, his voice flat, devoid of real appreciation. "But in the future, consult with me before making financial commitments of this magnitude. Asher made a mistake, but he's learning. We need to support him while he grows into his role." I sat there, stunned into silence. 10 years of dedication, 10 years of literally saving his son's blunders, and I was still being treated as a subordinate, a cleanup crew for my brother, who couldn't even be bothered to show up when things got difficult. That night, for the first time in my career, I seriously considered leaving the company. The thought was liberating, terrifying. But I'd invested so much of myself in Oakart Builders, so much of my identity was tied to it, that walking away felt like admitting defeat. Besides, where would I go? This was the family business, my business too. Or so I thought. The evening that changed everything began normally enough. Mom had invited Asher and me to Sunday dinner, saying Dad had an important announcement. I assumed it was about the new corporate office building we were planning, or perhaps the expansion into the commercial real estate market that I'd been researching for months. I arrived 15 minutes early, as usual, bringing a bottle of Dad's favorite single malt scotch. The house I grew up in looked the same as always, an immaculately maintained 4-bedroom colonial with the Oakart Builders sign proudly displayed near the driveway. 25 years of business success had allowed my parents to add a sunroom, a sprawling swimming pool, and extensive landscaping to the property. I still thought of it as home. Asher arrived 20 minutes late, strolling in without a hint of apology, his usual cavalier attitude on full display. Mom fussed over him as if he'd returned from war, rather than the short drive from his waterfront condo. Dad beamed with pride when Asher casually mentioned he'd just put a deposit down on a new boat. No one, not a single person, asked about my recent successful negotiation of a multi-million-dollar contract that would secure work for the company for the next 3 years, literally guaranteeing our continued solvency. During dinner, after the usual small talk about weather and neighborhood gossip, Dad cleared his throat and raised his glass. The clinking of silverware stopped. "I've been thinking about the future of Oakart Builders," he began, his voice resonating with an almost theatrical solemnity. "I'm not getting any younger, and it's time to plan for succession." My heart quickened. This was it. This was the moment I'd been working toward, sacrificing for, enduring for, all these years. After 15 years of dedication, surely Dad recognized my contributions, my commitment, my undeniable value. "Your mother and I have decided it's time to start stepping back from day-to-day operations," he continued, looking at Martha, who gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "We want to travel, enjoy our golden years, and watch the business continue to thrive under new leadership." I sat up straighter, my mind already mentally reviewing the comprehensive transition plan I'd been quietly developing for years, a plan that meticulously outlined a phased leadership transfer, including contingencies and growth strategies. "Therefore," Dad said, turning slowly, deliberately toward Asher, whose face was already a picture of smug anticipation, "we've decided to transfer ownership of Oakart Builders to Asher, effective immediately." The room started spinning. The clatter of silverware, the murmur of conversation, all faded into a roaring silence in my ears. I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles white, trying to anchor myself. Additionally, Dad continued, oblivious, as if he hadn't just shattered my entire world into a million irreparable pieces. "We'll be transferring the house and our investment accounts to Asher as well. He'll need these assets to secure the company's future growth." "What about Olivia?" Mom asked quietly, her voice barely a whisper, the first indication that perhaps this hadn't been a unanimous, fully comfortable decision on her part. Dad barely glanced my way, his focus still squarely on Asher, on the legacy he saw continuing through his son. "We're offering Olivia a generous severance package in recognition of her years with the company," he stated, his tone flat, dismissive. 3 months' salary and her company car. "That's it?" I finally found my voice, a raw, disbelieving whisper that quickly rose to a shaking crescendo. 15 years of my life, 15 years of building this company, sacrificing for it, and I get 3 months' pay while Asher gets everything? "Your brother deserves it," Dad said firmly, his tone indicating the matter was settled, closed, beyond discussion. His jaw was set, his eyes resolute. He's an Oakhart man. The company should stay with a family name. I'm an Oakhart too, I practically shouted, my voice shaking with a mixture of rage and profound hurt. Until you marry, Dad replied dismissively, as if my future marital status somehow invalidated my entire existence and contributions. Besides, Asher has a vision for the company's future. Asher, sitting across the table, finally spoke. He offered a sickeningly sweet smirk. Don't worry, sis, he drawled, the condescension thick in his voice. I might find a place for you in the new organization, maybe like HR or something. I looked at Mom, desperately hoping for some support, some sign of dissent, but she just stared at her plate, her lips a thin, worried line. We just want what's best for the company, she murmured, her voice laced with guilt. What's best for the company? I stood up abruptly, knocking my chair backward with a violent clatter. The sound echoed in the sudden silence. Asher doesn't know the first thing about running this business. He can't read a balance sheet. He's never completed a project on time, and half the crews refuse to work with him because he doesn't know what he's talking about. That's enough, Olivia. Dad slammed his hand on the table, the force of it making the silverware jump. This decision is final. The paperwork has already been prepared. Did you ever intend to include me in the company's future? I asked, tears threatening to spill, blurring my vision. Dad's expression softened slightly, a momentary crack in his rigid resolve. Olivia, you're smart. You'll land on your feet, but Oakhart Builders needs an Oakhart at the helm. It's tradition. A male Oakhart, you mean, I said, bitterly, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. Don't make this about gender, Asher interjected, suddenly defensive, though his voice still carried an irritating smugness. It's about who Dad trusts to carry on his legacy. I looked around the table at my family, Dad, resolute in his decision, his eyes fixed on some distant patriarchal ideal. Mom, unwilling to challenge him, retreating into herself. Asher, barely containing his triumph, basking in his inherited glory. 32 years of trying to prove myself, of loving people who would never value me equally, crashed down around me in a crushing wave of despair. Congratulations on your retirement, I said coldly to my parents, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. And congratulations on your inheritance, I added, turning my gaze to Asher, my eyes burning with a silent promise. I hope you all get exactly what you deserve. I walked out without looking back, ignoring my mother's desperate calls to return, their sound like muffled cries in the vast emptiness that had suddenly opened up inside me. In my car, parked on the familiar street I'd grown up on, I finally let the tears come. Not just for the lost inheritance, not just for the betrayal of my contributions, but for the recognition I'd never receive, for the wasted years trying to earn a love that should have been unconditional, for the dream of a future that had been snatched away. The next morning, with a clarity born of absolute devastation, I submitted my resignation, effective immediately. Dad called not to apologize, not to express remorse, but to remind me about the non-compete clause in my employment contract. You can't work for any competitor within 100 miles for 2 years, he said, as if that was his primary, indeed his only concern. I wouldn't dream of it, I replied, my voice calm, steady, before hanging up. I cleared out my office on a Sunday, when no one would be there to witness my quiet exodus. 15 years of my work, my dedication, my contributions, fit into 2 small cardboard boxes. As I took one last lingering look at the company I'd helped build, the legacy I'd poured my life into, I made myself a solemn promise. I would never again allow my worth to be determined by someone else's inability to see it. The first month after leaving Oakhart Builders was the hardest. I rented a furnished apartment in Portland, Oregon, as far from Denver as I could reasonably go while still staying within the construction industry. Each morning, I woke up questioning my decision, the enormity of starting over weighing heavily on me. Each night, I reminded myself that staying would have slowly, inexorably destroyed my soul. I allowed myself 2 weeks to grieve. I cried, I screamed into pillows, I wrote scathing letters to my family that I knew I would never send. Then I got to work, rebuilding my life from scratch, brick by painstaking brick, just like my grandfather had done. My severance package, paltry as it was, barely covered my first month's rent and security deposit. I dipped deep into my carefully built savings to furnish my apartment minimally and set up my new business. Oakhart Strategies. Keeping my last name, the name they thought only Asher was worthy of carrying, was a small but significant act of defiance. I created a professional website, printed business cards, and meticulously crafted my LinkedIn profile, emphasizing my extensive experience without explicitly mentioning it was a family business. Cold calls and networking events became my daily routine. I introduced myself to everyone in the Portland construction industry, from subcontractors to seasoned developers. Most doors remained firmly closed. Construction consulting from an unknown woman in a heavily male-dominated industry wasn't an easy sell. The rejections were frequent, the progress agonizingly slow. My first client came through pure desperation. Northwest Developments, a mid-sized developer, had fired their project manager mid-construction on a complex residential high-rise and desperately needed immediate help. The project was 3 months behind schedule and significantly over budget. It was a mess. I offered to work for a reduced fee, with a bonus structure tied directly to getting the project back on track and within budget. For 6 grueling weeks, I worked from 6 a.m. until midnight, fueled by coffee and sheer willpower. I renegotiated fiercely with subcontractors, reorganized the construction schedule to optimize crew time, and identified costly mistakes in the original plans that were bleeding them dry. By the end, we had cut the delays in half and identified enough savings to completely offset the previous overruns. The developer was impressed enough to not only pay my bonus, but immediately refer me to 2 of their colleagues. Suddenly, I had a small client base and positive, powerful references. I created a niche for myself, the construction consultant you call when things go wrong. I marketed myself as a problem solver, a fixer, rather than competing directly with established project management firms. I didn't want to just manage projects, I wanted to rescue them. 4 months into my new venture, I received a call from David Chen, Oakhart Builders' former head estimator. I quit, he announced without preamble, his voice tight with frustration. Asher fired Elena Ramirez and Jim last week, said they were too expensive after 30 years with the company. I couldn't stay after that. David filled me in on the sweeping, disastrous changes Asher had implemented. Experienced project managers, the backbone of the company, were being replaced with his fraternity brothers, friends with fancy, newly created titles, but absolutely no practical experience. Reliable subcontractors, who had built decades of trust with Oakhart Builders, were being abruptly dropped in favor of cheaper, unvetted alternatives that Asher found through internet searches. The sustainable construction division I'd built, the one that was attracting prestigious, high-profit clients, was being dismantled because Asher thought its certification requirements were too complicated. The place is falling apart, Olivia, David concluded, his voice heavy with a deep sadness. Your father is trying to keep his hands off, but he looks physically ill every time he visits the office. I thanked David for the information but maintained my boundary. Their business was no longer my concern. Still, I couldn't help but feel validated by the news. It wasn't personal satisfaction I felt, not a cruel delight, but a profound professional vindication. The skills and knowledge I'd brought to Oakhart Builders had been valuable, whether my family recognized it or not. As my first year in Portland progressed, so did my business. I hired 2 assistants and moved into a small but professional office space with large windows overlooking a bustling street. I developed a reputation for honesty, transparency, and most importantly, results. Unlike my father, who believed in hierarchical, top-down management, I fostered collaborative relationships with my clients. I explained my recommendations clearly, involved them in decisions, and empowered them rather than dictating terms. This approach resonated particularly well with female developers and project owners, a growing and increasingly influential demographic in the industry, who appreciated my clear communication and practical solutions. By my 15th month in Portland, I had a waiting list of clients and was seriously considering expanding my team further. Meanwhile, updates from former colleagues painted an increasingly dire picture of Oakhart Builders. Asher had secured several large contracts by significantly underbidding competitors, not realizing that these projects were guaranteed to operate at a loss from day one. Quality issues began to emerge as inexperienced managers failed to properly supervise subcontractors. leading to shoddy work and costly redos. Two major clients had already filed lawsuits over delays and defects. I maintained a professional distance from these problems, focusing on my own booming business, but I couldn't help feeling a twinge of sadness. Oakhart Builders had been my grandfather's legacy, a testament to hard work and integrity. Hundreds of families depended on the company for their livelihoods. Asher's mismanagement wasn't just hurting our family. It was affecting innocent employees who had been loyal for decades, people I knew by name and had worked alongside for years. One evening, I received a cryptic email from Susan, my parents' neighbor for 20 years. She wrote that there were unsettling rumors about my parents experiencing significant financial difficulties. Their country club membership had lapsed, and they had canceled their annual vacation to the Caribbean. Even the company trucks were changing. They no longer had the prominent Oakhart logo displayed. Instead, they were plain white, with only minimal, almost hidden identification. It was a stark visual representation of the company's fading prestige. I nearly called my mother that night, my finger hovering over her contact. But I stopped myself. They had made their choice. They had entrusted everything, their legacy, their home, their future, to Asher, believing that sharing their DNA and gender made him inherently more worthy than my years of demonstrated competence, my tireless dedication. Whatever consequences came from that disastrous decision were theirs to bear. Instead, I channeled my energy into growing my business. I expanded into preventative consulting, helping developers avoid the costly mistakes I'd seen repeatedly in troubled projects. I developed a comprehensive training program for new project managers, based on practical, real-world experience rather than textbook theories. I hired 3 more consultants, all women with extensive construction experience who had faced similar barriers in traditional male-dominated companies. By the end of my second year in Portland, Oakhart Strategies had become a respected and sought-after name in the Midwest construction industry. I had proven to myself definitively that my success at Oakhart Builders hadn't been a fluke or the result of nepotism. If anything, I had succeeded there despite the obstacles deliberately placed in my path. I bought a small but elegant condo in a historic building downtown, my first real home that was truly, unequivocally mine. As I unpacked my belongings, I found a faded photo of my grandfather, Sam, standing proudly in front of his first Oakhart construction truck, a determined glint in his eye. His expression showed the same pride and determination I now felt. In that moment, I realized I was carrying on his true legacy, not through a name on a building I didn't own, but through the values of hard work, integrity, and resilience he had embodied. That night, I slept better than I had in years, finally at peace with my new path, no longer defined by someone else's narrow vision. I had no idea that the very next morning would bring my past crashing back into my carefully reconstructed life. Asher's approach to running Oakhart Builders could best be described as a toddler playing with blocks, indiscriminately knocking down established structures for the sheer pleasure of destruction, with absolutely no plan for rebuilding. Within the first 6 months of his leadership, he'd made changes that systematically undid decades of careful business development, decades of my father's expansions, and my meticulous improvements. His first major decision was firing the company's long-standing, highly reputable accounting firm. In their place, he hired his college roommate's brother, who had just received his CPA license and was, by all accounts, completely out of his depth. The new accountant, eager to please and woefully inexperienced with construction industry specifics, failed to properly track job costs across multiple projects. By the time tax season arrived, the company's books were in such utter disarray that they had to hire a forensic accountant at tremendous, unbudgeted expense just to make sense of the chaos. Asher's next brilliant move was restructuring the management team. He eliminated the positions of 3 seasoned project managers who had been with the company for over 20 years, claiming they were resistant to fresh ideas. In their place, he hired 4 friends from his fraternity days, none of whom had a single day of legitimate construction experience. He created new, meaningless executive titles like Chief Innovation Officer and Director of Brand Experience, complete with 6-figure salaries and luxury company vehicles, paid for with the company's dwindling cash. The Oakhart Builders office, once a model of efficient operation and quiet professionalism, transformed into something resembling a frat house. Asher installed a ping-pong table and a kegerator in the main conference room, claiming it would boost creativity and foster a startup culture. Monday morning staff meetings were replaced with vision sessions, where Asher would ramble incoherently about his grand ideas for company expansion, while his newly hired sycophantic executives nodded enthusiastically, completely detached from the reality of the business. Meanwhile, actual construction projects floundered without proper oversight, delayed by incompetence and a complete lack of understanding of basic building processes. The green building division I had meticulously established, which accounted for nearly 30% of company revenue and was our most profitable segment, was unceremoniously dismantled because Asher found the certification requirements too complicated and too much paperwork. Long-standing clients who had specifically sought out Oakhart Builders for sustainable building options, clients I had personally cultivated, took their business elsewhere, disgusted by Asher's short-sightedness. Asher's approach to winning new business was equally disastrous. He slashed bid prices to undercut competitors, desperate to show growth and market share, without understanding the actual underlying costs involved in complex construction projects. Oakhart Builders began securing contracts that were guaranteed to operate at a loss before the first shovel even hit dirt. When experienced estimators tried to explain the problem, showing him the numbers, Asher accused them of being negative and not seeing the big picture of growing market share. He was allergic to facts. The company fleet, once maintained on a careful, preventative schedule, fell into disrepair as Asher redirected the maintenance budget to lease a brand new Porsche, ostensibly as his client development vehicle. Equipment began breaking down frequently on job sites, causing significant delays that triggered crippling penalty clauses in contracts. Subcontractors who had worked with Oakhart Builders for generations found themselves waiting 90 days for payment instead of the standard 30. Many refused to take on new Oakhart projects, forcing Asher to hire unknown, unreliable subcontractors whose work quality was inconsistent at best, often leading to costly redos and further delays. By the 9-month mark, the company's cash reserves, painstakingly built up over decades of careful management by my grandfather and father, had been completely depleted. Asher began using the company's line of credit to cover regular operating expenses, a cardinal sin in construction management, a clear sign of a company in deep financial distress. Interest payments alone were eating up thousands of dollars each month. My parents, George and Martha, who had planned to enjoy a comfortable, well-deserved retirement, found themselves increasingly drawn back into the business as problems multiplied. Dad would stop by job sites, wincing visibly at obvious quality issues and a pervasive sense of disorganization, but still hesitant to directly undermine his son's authority. Mom, ever the peacekeeper, started handling accounts payable again when vendors began calling the house directly, demanding payment. Still, they made excuses for Asher's performance. He's still learning, Dad would tell concerned employees, his voice lacking conviction. The market is challenging right now, Mom would explain to friends when they asked why Oakhart trucks were disappearing from local job sites. The company's reputation, built meticulously over 3 generations, eroded rapidly, dissolving like sand through fingers. General contractors who had previously specified Oakhart Builders for their projects began looking elsewhere, no longer trusting the name. The company's bonding capacity, its ability to secure the performance bonds required for larger, more lucrative projects, was severely downgraded due to its financial instability, severely limiting the size and type of projects they could even bid on. 12 months into Asher's leadership, the first major lawsuit arrived. A commercial client from one of Asher's underbid projects sued for substantial damages when structural issues emerged in a recently completed office building. Investigation revealed that Asher had approved substituting lower-grade materials than those specified in the contract, purely to save costs and pad his non-existent profit margins. The company's insurance carrier initially denied the claim, citing willful negligence, a catastrophic blow. A second lawsuit followed soon after, when an apartment complex Oakhart Builders had constructed developed extensive severe water damage. The source was traced to improperly installed flashing, a basic construction element that any experienced project manager would have verified rigorously. The settlements, when they finally came, depleted what remained of the company's meager cash reserves. Around the 15-month mark, Asher made his most catastrophic decision yet. Without consulting financial advisors, without any due diligence, he used the company's remaining borrowing capacity to purchase an adjacent property for a planned grandiose headquarters expansion. The timing couldn't have been worse. The commercial real estate market was at its peak, and he paid well above market value. Within 6 months, property values plummeted, leaving the company upside down on the loan, burdened with an immense, unserviceable debt for an asset they didn't need and couldn't afford. His personal spending, meanwhile, continued unabated, a testament to his staggering delusion. Asher bought a new, larger boat, then a lavish vacation property in Arizona. He took business development trips to Las Vegas and the Caribbean, maxing out company credit cards at high-end restaurants and luxury hotels. With the business hemorrhaging cash at an alarming rate, Asher began tapping into my parents' personal finances. First came short-term, unsustainable loans from their retirement accounts. Then he mortgaged the family home, the one that had been paid off for years and was supposed to be their retirement nest egg. Finally, he liquidated every single one of their investment accounts that had been intended to fund their golden years. By the 18-month mark, my parents' comfortable retirement had transformed into an utter financial nightmare. The company was operating at a significant monthly loss. Their personal savings were completely depleted. The family home, once a symbol of their success and stability, now had a massive mortgage with payments they couldn't possibly afford. Dad, who had planned to spend his days golfing and enjoying his well-earned rest, was back on job sites at 68 years old, looking utterly defeated, trying desperately to salvage troubled projects Asher had ruined. Through former colleagues, I heard that my father had aged 10 years and 18 months. His confident stride had become a worried shuffle, his eyes constantly distant, haunted by worry. My mother had developed anxiety-related health issues, the stress manifesting physically in high blood pressure and insomnia. Asher, meanwhile, remained in blissful denial. He blamed the economy, disloyal employees, and demanding clients for the company's problems. He stubbornly refused to acknowledge his own colossal role in the disaster, continuing to draw his exorbitant executive salary even as the company fell behind on payroll for regular, hard-working employees. The final straw came when the bank called the company's line of credit due to multiple covenant violations. With no cash to pay it off and no assets left to pledge, Oakhart Builders faced imminent, irreversible bankruptcy. The business my grandfather had started from nothing, that my father had built into a regional powerhouse, and that I had helped modernize for the future, was weeks, maybe days, away from collapse. That's when my phone lit up with a text from my mother. "Mortgages due. Can we talk?" The text from my mother arrived at precisely 7:13 a.m. on a Tuesday. "Mortgages due. Can we talk?" My first immediate instinct was to ignore it. After all, I hadn't heard from her in nearly 2 years, except for a generic Christmas card and a perfunctory birthday text. They'd made their beds, hadn't they? But curiosity, a nagging, insistent pull, got the better of me. What did mortgages due even mean? The family home, the one Asher now technically owned, had been paid off for over a decade. I responded with a single, unadorned question mark. 3 dots appeared immediately, then disappeared, then reappeared. Finally, her full response arrived. "We had to take out a mortgage to help the company. We can't make this month's payment." I put my phone down on my bedside table and went about my morning routine: coffee, shower, professional attire. The familiar rhythm helped me process this unexpected, unwelcome intrusion from my past. By the time I reached my office, 3 more desperate texts had arrived. "Please, Olivia, we're in trouble. Asher says it's temporary. Your father won't admit it, but we need help." I muted the conversation and focused on my day's appointments. I had a prospective client meeting, 2 project site visits, and a complex proposal to finalize. My business, Oakhart Strategies, was thriving precisely because I maintained professional boundaries and focused on solutions rather than inherited drama. My family's financial problems were not my emergency. But as the day progressed, the text continued, a relentless drip of desperation. By mid-afternoon, even my father had messaged. His text was terse, formal. "We need to talk. Business matter. Coming from a man who had effectively disowned me from the family business, who had literally given it away, the irony was almost laughable. After my last meeting, I sat in my quiet office overlooking the Chicago skyline, the city lights beginning to twinkle as dusk fell. I contemplated my options. I could continue ignoring them, which would be entirely justifiable given our history. I could send money to cover the mortgage payment, a quick fix that would merely enable their dysfunction without addressing the catastrophic underlying issues. Or I could engage, but on my terms, setting clear, unyielding boundaries. I decided on the third option, not out of residual family obligation, that wellspring had long since dried up, but out of professional curiosity. How bad had things actually gotten? I called my mother at exactly 5:30 p.m., knowing she'd be waiting by the phone. She answered on the first ring, her voice strained, bordering on hysterical. "Olivia, thank God. I've been waiting all day." "I had meetings," I said neutrally, my voice betraying no emotion. "What's going on with the mortgage?" What followed was a 20-minute rambling monologue of financial disaster. The house had been mortgaged to secure a business loan when the company's credit was severely downgraded. That massive loan had, predictably, been used to cover losses on 3 major projects that Asher had spectacularly underbid. The monthly payment was $4,300, a substantial sum for a couple whose retirement income had been decimated by Asher's reckless business loans from their personal accounts. "We're 3 months behind," Mom admitted, her voice breaking. "The bank called yesterday. They're starting foreclosure proceedings next week if we don't catch up." "Where's Asher in all this?" I asked, my voice flat. A pause. "He's trying his best," she said, unconvincingly. "The market is challenging right now. Mom, I work in the same industry. The market is booming. Well-run construction companies can't hire fast enough to keep up with demand." Another pause, longer this time. "Your father would like to speak with you," she said finally, passing the phone. Dad's voice had aged, changed. The once authoritative tone, the voice that had boomed with pride and dismissiveness, now wavered slightly, laced with a desperation I'd never heard. "Olivia? Thank you for calling." "I'm listening," I said, my voice neither hostile nor welcoming, simply expectant. He cleared his throat, a nervous, dry sound. "The situation at Oakart Builders has become complicated. We're facing some temporary cash flow issues that have affected our personal finances." "Define temporary and complicated," I replied, cutting through his euphemisms. What emerged over the next hour was far worse than I had imagined. The company was essentially insolvent. Multiple lawsuits from clients and suppliers were pending. The bank had frozen their business accounts. Asher had hired and fired 3 CFOs in 18 months, each one quitting when they realized the true extent of the financial mismanagement. Employees hadn't received paychecks for 3 weeks. Tax liens had been filed for unpaid payroll taxes. The picture he painted was one of utter, unmitigated ruin. "Where is Asher now?" I asked, the question sharp. "He's in Arizona," Dad admitted reluctantly, "at the condo. He says he's meeting with potential investors, but—" He trailed off, his voice hollow. "But he's probably on his boat," I finished for him. The bitter truth hanging between us. Dad didn't confirm or deny. Instead, he got to the point, the real reason for the call. "We need your help, Olivia. Financial help." "Financial help?" I asked, incredulous. "More than that," he said, the words a profound humiliation for him. "We need you to come back, to help us salvage what's left of the company." I nearly dropped the phone. After everything that had happened, after giving Asher everything and me nothing, they wanted me to return and fix his mess. The bitterness I thought I'd processed, the resentment I'd buried deep, bubbled up unexpectedly, raw and potent. "You want me to rescue the company that you told me I didn't deserve to be part of?" "I made a mistake," Dad said quietly, his voice barely audible. "We all did. But this isn't just about us anymore. There are 47 families depending on Oakart Builders for their livelihoods. People who did nothing wrong except trust our family to lead responsibly." He was playing the guilt card expertly, appealing to the sense of responsibility he had painstakingly instilled in me over the years. The worst part was, he wasn't wrong. Innocent employees were suffering because of my family's poor decisions, because of Asher's monumental incompetence. "What exactly are you proposing?" I asked, My voice calmed despite the storm raging inside me. Come back as COO, he said, rushing the words out. Full authority to make whatever changes are necessary. Asher will step back to a business development role only. And your ownership stake? A hesitation. We could offer you 20% of the company. I laughed out loud. It wasn't a polite chuckle. It was a harsh, mirthless bark of disbelief. 20% of a company that's effectively bankrupt. That's your offer after I built a successful business from scratch, while Asher drove yours into the ground? 30%, Dad countered desperately, weakly. This call is over, I said, my voice sharp, decisive. If you're serious about my help, have your lawyer draw up papers for 51% ownership, transferable to me immediately upon verification of the company's financial position. Otherwise, good luck with the foreclosure. Olivia, be reasonable, Dad started, his voice pleading. I am being reasonable, I snapped, my patience wearing thin. You're asking me to leave a successful business I built to rescue one that you explicitly told me I didn't deserve to own. My terms are non-negotiable. I'll talk to your mother, he said finally, his voice defeated. Do that, I told him. And while you're at it, talk to Asher. Explain that his vacation is over. If I come back, he works under my direction or not at all. After hanging up, I sat in my quiet office, watching the Portland lights come on as dusk fell. The conversation had left me shaken, not because of their predicament, but because of my own response to it. 2 years ago, the old Olivia would have immediately rushed to help, regardless of the terms. I would have sacrificed my own interests, my own hard-won peace, to save the family business out of a misplaced sense of duty, out of a desperate, lingering hope for approval. Now I understood my worth. I had built something valuable, something truly mine, on my own terms. If my family wanted to access my skills and experience, they would have to acknowledge that value appropriately. No more giving everything and receiving nothing in return. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Your father is talking to the lawyer tomorrow. Please help us, Olivia. We have nowhere else to turn. I left it unanswered. Their crisis had simmered for months. It could wait another day while I considered my options carefully. Whatever decision I made would be based on business logic, not emotional manipulation or a misplaced sense of family obligation. For the first time in our relationship, I had the leverage. The question was, what would I do with it? 3 days after the desperate call from my parents, I boarded a flight to Denver. In my briefcase were 2 documents, meticulously prepared by my attorney. One for a standard consulting agreement, the other for a transfer of controlling interest, 51% ownership in Oakhart Builders. I had no idea which would be signed, if either. I had rented a car rather than asking my parents to pick me up, maintaining the professional distance this situation required. The drive to their house, the house I grew up in, felt surreal. The once immaculate property looked neglected, almost mournful. The landscaping was overgrown. The once crisp white paint on the trim was peeling in places, revealing weathered wood underneath. The prominent Oakhart Builders sign near the driveway, a symbol of so much pride and success, was gone, leaving only faded marks on the brick where it once stood. My mother opened the door before I could even knock, pulling me into a tight, almost frantic hug that I didn't return. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her face etched with exhaustion. My father stood awkwardly in the entryway behind her, looking older and smaller than I remembered, his shoulders slumped, his eyes vacant. Asher was noticeably absent. "Where's Asher?" I asked after minimal pleasantries, my voice flat. "He's coming," Dad said, checking his watch, a nervous tick. "He should be here soon." We moved to the living room, which felt heavy with unspoken tensions and the tangible weight of financial ruin. Financial documents were spread across the coffee table, like a morbid display. Stacks of bank statements, ominous legal notices, bundles of tax forms. The physical evidence of their financial collapse was undeniable. "Before we begin," I said, my voice calm, professional, "I need to understand exactly what I'm walking into. I want to see everything. Bank statements, credit card bills, loan documents, lawsuits, tax notices, everything." For the next 2 hours, my parents painstakingly walked me through the disaster. The company had over $3.7 million in debt, with virtually no assets remaining that weren't already seized or pledged. Suppliers were refusing deliveries without upfront payment, bringing projects to a grinding halt. 3 major clients had terminated contracts due to delays and egregious quality issues. The family home, the crown jewel of their life, had a crippling $780,000 mortgage, and no payments had been made in 4 months. Foreclosure was not just a threat, it was imminent. "Where did all the money go?" I asked, my voice quiet, though I already knew the answer. Dad hesitated, looking away, but Mom, her voice trembling, finally spoke up. "Asher made some questionable decisions." As if on cue, the front door opened, and Asher strolled in. He was tanned from his Arizona business trip, designer sunglasses perched jauntily on his head, a forced casual air about him. He stopped short when he saw me, his smug expression faltering for a split second. "Family reunion?" he said with forced casualness, trying to regain his composure. "Nobody told me Olivia was coming." "Sit down, Asher," I said, my voice firm, cutting through his bravado. "We're discussing how you destroyed a 3-generation family business in less than 2 years." His face flushed a mottled red. "That's not fair. The market conditions." "Save it," I interrupted, my voice sharp as a razor. "I've seen the numbers. This has nothing to do with market conditions and everything to do with incompetence and embezzlement." "Embezzlement?" he blustered, trying to sound outraged. "That's a serious accusation." Without a word, I pulled a document from my briefcase. It was a meticulously prepared spreadsheet, a damning analysis of his personal expenditures directly charged to the company. Country club memberships, first-class flights, the boat, the Arizona condo, I rattled off, pointing to line after line, all purchased with company funds while projects were failing and employees weren't being paid. Asher looked to our father for support, a desperate, childish plea in his eyes, but Dad stared at the floor, his face a mask of shame. "I was entitled to compensation as CEO," Asher tried, weakly. "Not when the company is insolvent," I countered, leaning forward slightly. "That's textbook fraudulent conveyance, Asher. Possibly criminal, depending on how the funds were documented." The color drained from his face, leaving it ashen. For perhaps the first time in his life, Asher realized he couldn't charm or bluster his way out of a situation. He was caught, exposed, and vulnerable. "I've reviewed everything," I said, addressing my parents now, pointedly ignoring Asher. "There are 2 options on the table." I laid the 2 documents on the coffee table. Option 1. I come in as a consultant, charging my standard rates to develop a restructuring plan that you implement. Option 2. I take controlling interest in the company, 51%, and full authority to execute whatever changes I deem necessary. "This is ridiculous," Asher interjected, finding his voice, though it was now laced with panic. "You can't just waltz in and take control of my company." "Your company?" I raised an eyebrow, a cold, challenging stare. "The company you ran into the ground. The company that's weeks away from bankruptcy. That company." "Olivia is right," Dad said quietly, his voice hoarse but firm. My mother and I both turned to him in surprise. It was the first time I'd ever heard my father criticize Asher directly, unequivocally. "We gave you every advantage, Asher. Resources, opportunities, authority, and you squandered all of it." The shock silenced even Asher. His mouth opened, then closed. "We'll take option 2, Dad continued, looking directly at me, a flicker of his old strength returning. Full control to Olivia." Asher started to protest again, but Dad held up a hand, a warning in his eyes. "It's done, Asher. If you want any hope of salvaging your reputation or staying out of legal trouble, you'll cooperate fully with whatever Olivia decides." My mother nodded in agreement, tears silently streaming down her face, a clear sign of her deep regret and acceptance. I pushed the ownership transfer documents across the table. My parents signed without further discussion, their pens scratching heavily on the paper. Just like that, in a Denver living room filled with debt and despair, I became the majority owner of Oakhart Builders. "Now what?" Asher asked sullenly, his voice barely a whisper. "Now the real work begins," I replied, standing up, my voice infused with a quiet power. "Tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. at the office, everyone, including you, Asher." The next morning, I arrived at Oakhart Builders headquarters at 6:30 a.m. The building that had once been a source of family pride, a gleaming monument to success, now looked shabby and neglected. The grass in front was patchy, the windows streaked. The Oakhart Builders sign, though back up, looked faded and chipped. Inside was worse. Disorganized paperwork overflowed from filing cabinets. Outdated computers sat on dusty desks. An empty desk where longtime employees had once sat were stark reminders of Asher's purging. A faint stale smell of old beer lingered in the air from Asher's conference room improvements. My parents arrived at 6:50 a.m., looking anxious but determined. Asher predictably strolled in at 7:20 a.m. with a large steaming coffee in hand, offering no apology for his tardiness. I gathered them in the conference room, now devoid of the ping-pong table and kegerator, but still bearing scuff marks on the walls from their frat house experiments. "Here's how this works," I began, my voice calm but firm, my gaze sweeping over each of them. "This is a rescue operation, not a family reunion. I will make decisions based solely on what's best for the company's survival, not anyone's feelings or expectations. Anyone who can't accept that should leave now." No one moved. "Good," I said. "First order of business, Asher," I stated, my eyes fixing on him. He visibly flinched. "You're removed from all operational and financial responsibilities, effective immediately. You'll work exclusively in client relations and only under my direct supervision. Your salary is reduced to match other department heads. Company credit cards are canceled. The company car is returned, and the Arizona condo you purchased with company funds will be sold immediately." Asher started to protest, a flicker of his old indignation, but Dad placed a warning hand on his arm, a silent command. He subsided, glaring at me, but he stayed. "Mom and Dad," I continued, turning to them, "you'll serve in advisory capacities only. You have institutional knowledge that's valuable, but no decision-making authority. Your retirement benefits are suspended until the company is profitable again, and its debts are addressed." My mother nodded, her eyes glistening. My father looked pained, but he didn't object. The stark reality of their situation, of Asher's utter failure, had finally shattered their denial. "I've already contacted key former employees who were terminated or quit under Asher's leadership," I announced, moving on to the recovery plan. 7 have agreed to return, including David Chen and Elena Ramirez, who will resume their previous roles in estimating and office management, respectively. I then outlined the rest of my restructuring plan: aggressively renegotiating with creditors for better terms, meeting personally with dissatisfied clients to regain their trust, implementing strict financial controls, and selling every non-essential asset to generate operating capital. I made it unequivocally clear that the recovery would be painful and required sacrifices from everyone, starting at the top. Over the next 3 months, I split my time relentlessly between Portland, where my assistant capably managed ongoing Oakhart Strategies projects, and Denver, where I implemented the rescue plan at Oakhart Builders. I worked 16-hour days, 7 days a week, fueled by an unwavering determination to save what was left of my grandfather's legacy. I made difficult decisions, including regretfully laying off Asher's completely unqualified fraternity brothers and terminating expensive office leases he'd signed. The turnaround wasn't immediate, but progress came steadily. We negotiated viable payment plans with suppliers who respected my reputation in the industry. 2 major clients, whose contracts had been terminated, agreed to reinstate them with revised timelines after I personally guaranteed quality oversight and consistent communication. The bank, seeing a clear path to recovery, restructured the existing loans based on our realistic recovery plan. Asher, to my genuine surprise, proved somewhat useful. Once limited strictly to client relations, stripped of all financial authority and operational power, but still able to charm potential clients with his superficial charisma, he secured several small but profitable projects that helped stabilize our precarious cash flow. He seemed humbled by the experience of nearly losing everything, though I remained cautiously optimistic, always vigilant about his newfound responsibility. 6 months into the rescue operation, Oakhart Builders was stable. Not thriving, not yet, but no longer at imminent risk of collapse. The bleeding had stopped. I had established robust systems and training programs that allowed me to scale back my direct day-to-day involvement, trusting the experienced team I'd brought back. My parents had downsized to a smaller, more manageable home, using the proceeds from selling their over-mortgaged property to eliminate their personal debt. They were no longer teetering on the brink of financial ruin. As for me, I maintained majority ownership of Oakhart Builders, but hired an experienced, highly competent construction executive to handle day-to-day operations in Denver, while I returned to my flourishing Portland business, Oakhart Strategies, full-time. I had proven what I needed to prove, to my family, yes, but more importantly, to myself. The most significant change, however, wasn't in the company's financial statements or the newly organized office. It was in my family's dynamics. My father, George, who had once so easily dismissed my contributions, now consulted me on every major decision regarding Oakhart Builders. He respected my judgment, my strategic vision, finally seeing me not as a secondary daughter, but as a capable leader. My mother, Martha, who had enabled years of favoritism, apologized tearfully during a private dinner one evening in Portland, acknowledging her silent complicity and expressing profound regret. Even Asher, albeit reluctantly at first, acknowledged that the company would have disappeared without my intervention. He still struggled with humility, but the fear of complete ruin had for once clipped his wings. But the most important transformation was internal. I no longer needed their approval or recognition to validate my worth. I had built a successful business on my own terms, then rescued the family company on my terms. My sense of value came from within, from the undeniable proof of my own capabilities and resilience, not from external validation. A year after that desperate text about the mortgage, I received another message from my mother. It was simple, full of relief. The company showed a profit this quarter. Thank you for saving our legacy. I smiled at the message, a quiet, knowing smile, but didn't immediately reply. Instead, I looked around my Portland office, at the bustling team I had assembled based on merit rather than nepotism, at the thriving business I had built from nothing. This was my legacy. Not a name on a building or a company passed down through generations, but the knowledge that I had created something valuable through my own efforts, my own ingenuity, my own unwavering belief in myself. Later that evening, I finally replied to my mother. My message was short, but it carried the weight of years of unspoken truth. It was never about the legacy. It was about recognizing worth where it exists, not where tradition dictates it should be. I'm glad you finally see that. The journey from being the overlooked daughter to the company's savior taught me lessons no business school could provide. It taught me that sometimes losing everything is the only way to discover your true value. It taught me that standing firm in your worth isn't selfish. It's absolutely necessary for your survival and your peace. And most importantly, it taught me that the opinions of others, even family, don't define your capabilities or your potential. You define it. You prove it. So what about you? Have you ever had to prove your worth to people who should have recognized it all along? Have you had to create boundaries with family to protect your self-respect and your future? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel for more real-life experiences and lessons learned the hard way. Remember, sometimes the people who should support you the most are the ones who see your value least, until you show them exactly what they stand to lose. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and I'll see you in the next video.